We're here to talk about fraud and ID verification today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Diarmuid, Jason and Trisham. If you could all just give us a little introduction to yourselves in around 30 seconds or so. Diarmuid, we'll start with you.
Me first. So my name is Diarmuid Thoma. I head up fraud and data science at AtData. Showing my age, but I'm actually in fraud prevention for 25 years this year, actually. So I've seen a few different things happen and emerge, and it's been interesting. But yeah, at AtData we specialize in basically email-related fraud prevention products.
Hi everybody, I'm Jason Sheehy. I am Head of Identity at Post Office. I'm responsible for our identity services business, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people. A lot of work we do with government, with banks, and with other private sector institutions, making sure that there are solutions for everybody. And that means for people who are digitally excluded, identity excluded, we have solutions for those, as well as attempting to push forward all of the digital identity adoption in the UK to bring about more controls and more benefit to all users.
Hi, I'm Trisham. I lead the financial crime practice at Genpact. We work with banks, fintech, payment companies to design, structure, deliver their financial crime operations, which include fraud and identity. And thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you very much, Trisham. Obviously, fraud and ID verification issues across both the financial services space and other industries too. And I suppose one of the key facts is collaboration and how intelligence sharing plays an important role in combating both financial crime and identity fraud. Diarmuid, for you, how important is that?
Well, I think it's critical. I think it's been, over the past few years, particularly in the last 10, 15, with the emergence of like the cloud environments, cloud infrastructure, it's really enabled us to have, if you think about, let's say, when I started, a fraud platform would just query what the orders they've seen in the last, months or 2 weeks, But now any company can connect into these, what are they called, super networks, where, and we're one of them, where there's thousands of other companies sharing that data, sharing fraud trends, sharing that. And that allows for instant connectivity. So you can connect to a fraud trend you've never seen before and stop that. So that collaboration is kind of ingrained into a lot of the platforms that we use and do that. But it's critical. I mean, it's critical to what we wanted to achieve.
Absolutely. Jason?
I think my lens on the collaboration side of things is a little bit different in that the collaboration needs to be as much with the end user, the citizen, the person who has the identity, as it is with their use of that identity. And so whilst there are fantastic sort of negative information networks, there's also a need to actually ensure that we're focusing on the proliferation of positive information as well. And that's really the role that either user-centric products like digital identity apps and digital ID wallets can really help to play that, can really help to fill that space. And I think it's really the intersection between those two things of effectively using negative information sources and networks, along with actually bringing the individual that we're trying to serve in on this. Let's bring them in on the discussion as well.
Absolutely. Trisham, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think along the same line, I think collaboration is key. I mean, if you go on the dark web, I don't spend too much time there, but if you go there, you will see that fraudsters are collaborating. So I think this is why the industry, and when I say the industry, is not just technology providers, but telco, social media, or even e-commerce should collaborate and bring the information so that you kind of stop nefarious activities. I think the difficulty in collaboration is normally around the mechanism that regulators and policymakers put in place. So I think that needs to go hand in hand, and I think that would be kind of probably like the challenge in terms of bringing this collaboration.
Sure, so that would be one of the key barriers perhaps to further collaboration throughout the industry. Any thoughts on other barriers that may remain?
Jason actually brought up a really good point. I kind of maybe misconstrued a bit. The super networks are probably not necessarily looked as a negative list. Think of it more as a trust network, right? So if you're the vast majority, 98% of people are good, right? And they buy stuff and they don't charge backs, they don't default, they don't. So they should benefit from these networks. They should benefit they should have less checks, less friction, less, because they've built up that trust, they've built up that, and that's what most, not all of them do it this way, but we've certainly tried, is to have as much as much as on the trust side, and enable that to have frictionless payments for we know somebody's good. When we know they're not compromised, we know whatever. So yeah, it plays both sides, and it is good. So I think it's good for everybody, not just fraud prevention.
But there is a lot of fear and uncertainty associated with that being just negative information sources. I mean, data breaches are now just a fact of life. We have to assume that all of our personal information is in the public realm, in some dark, shady corner of the internet or similar. And so being able to actually have a more transparent way of working with the end users, with the citizens, I think that's something that we need to step towards. I don't think we're there yet. People are still worried about the digital conversations, the checks that are happening behind closed doors. And it's only in the recent discussions and announcements from the government on digital ID in the country that, again, we see all of those, frankly, incorrect assumptions coming out. So I think we need to tackle those.
An interesting stat, we did some work on this once, so we were looking into kind of data breaches and breach to emails and things like that. And the evidence shows if you're not breached, so you're not part of a breach, you're more likely to be fraud. So because so many, at this point with so much of our emails, you can take it for granted that pretty much everybody here and their emails have been part of a data breach at some point. But that actually indicates that you had a real email being used, and that was so the fact that it's not been part of a breach is actually, there's a higher fraud rate in that. So it's interesting.
Interesting point. Trisham, any other thoughts?
No, I think there are, to be a bit more positive around this, I think there are more technology being kind of developed to provide that, privacy around the data that you kind of put out there. And I think we're not there yet, I agree. But I think from what I've observed is that as we're kind of moving more towards, you and I taking ownership of our identity, we need more technology which provide that credentialization of that data so that we decide what we put out there and then how it's being used. So we're not there yet, I agree fully, but I think there are technology coming which will kind of provide that safety on your data which you put out there.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, throughout this panel, there will be a roaming microphone. So if anyone would like to make any comments, any questions at any time, I think Tim will be around somewhere to assist you with that. I suppose then one of the main things to do with the evolving threat landscape is obviously AI. Obviously, it's not only does it help streamline some customer-facing operations like ID checks, but it may also open the door to opportunistic fraudsters as well. Jason, what is your take on AI in the fraud and ID space?
I think AI is absolutely fantastic. It makes lives simpler, it can make interacting with different systems easier, and that's for the fraudsters. It's the same for the customers as well, though, and so we really need to strike a balance of understanding what do we want people to actually be doing, what do we want to enable, what barriers do we want to break down, and not jumping ahead in the discussion onto sort of, is friction a good thing or not? Friction's a good thing. But we need to be very clear on what and how we're using AI for what benefit and under whose instruction. Because a stolen identity or a stolen pool of identities, when you're using a tooling of agentic AI, just means that you can hit 1,000 times more targets as quickly. It's far easier to wash effectively an entire stolen data set using AI than it is to manually do it today. So it's good for customers, but it's also great for fraudsters.
Trisham? Yeah,
I think, as you said, it's great for fraudsters, but I think if I look at some of the good uses of AI, for example, and if anyone is not working on AI, they are behind the curve, they are not doing the right thing. So everyone should be looking at their center of excellence to create those AI. And I think especially in the world of know your customer, we've seen that AI or agentic AI can kind of increase the way that you do work, do things faster, and even improve the way that you're doing it. So I think, it's a double-edged sword. Technology has always been misused. So, but you just need to kind of look at the right mechanism to use it, and also create the kind of the governance around it. Because, and I think the sweet spot at the moment, at least from my perspective, is that there is AI and not still human in the loop. There's still some form of oversight. So I think at this stage, AI, I think, is good. It will be misused, and I think what we need to do more, and again with policymakers, with regulators, is to kind of understand the governance around it and how it's being used.
Absolutely, and we'll touch on some of the governance and regulatory themes a bit later on. Diarmuid, any thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I mean, like AI is effectively just the next evolutionary step in what we do, right? It's the reason most of us like working in fraud and identity is because it changes every day. It changes, and it's something new, something else, and that's what AI is. It's the next. Now, it's a big one. Now, in fairness, but I was reading about agentic commerce, and I was more and more I read, the more and more I kind of went, oh Christ, this is going to be a nightmare for us, because. So for those of you not familiar, like agentic commerce is effectively the AI agent is doing everything. So you're saying, I want the latest Adidas Sambas or whatever, and it does that. It goes, finds the best price, and it buys them. So you didn't go to the website. You didn't do the searching, the stuff that we now currently expect a customer to do. In fact, current fraud models are very much designed that they will look for scripts and things that do that, and that is a negative feature. So now we're just on the cusp of what was a clear, nice, clean negative feature turning into and that means that we have to remove that as a negative feature because it would just generate false positives. So all of this stuff, this is evolving, and I'm not worried about it because it's just another evolutionary step. We face them in different sizes, yes, but we face them every month, every year. There's something new. So. But yeah, we get to use it as well, right? So when we get to use the models, the adaptive stuff, we get to use some of the linking technology like graph theory, and that's where, we touch on some of the other maybe parts of it, but the ability to overlay it with other data sources, and that gives you the strength back, so not worried. It's just going to be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the threat from the agentic commerce space is something new and evolving too. So we'll take this chance to open up to you, the audience. If there's any questions any of you have, please raise your hand. Thank you. And I'm sure a microphone will be coming over to you very soon. There it is.
Hello, I'm Mike. I'm San Francisco. We're building AI for AML, fraud prevention. I'm curious to know what you guys think. I think what you mentioned, it's a great example. When you have like agents acting on your behalf or on behalf of companies or on behalf of like anyone, you need to understand like who are the good agents, who are the bad ones, how do you verify them, how do you guys see this in the future, and how to prevent, like how to like identify them, who are the good and the bad, and how this like will impact AML and like risk and fraud.
I'll happily jump in. I think we've already got all the tools that we need to do this effectively. It's just a matter of ensuring that they're being used. And at the heart of it, you need to know who the individual is, either the individual or the business acting on behalf of that individual is, that's actually providing the instruction for agentic commerce or product sign-up or any kind of automated action. We have all the tools that we need to be able to do that. We have digital identity and identity verification tools. It just needs to be applied and used in a structured way. Because if you don't put them in at the heart of agentic commerce, then you end up with the risks of, well, who actually did instruct that bot to go and bid on that thing on eBay, and it's just ended up costing me my house. Like, the entire thing will run away if you don't put in place those fundamental foundations of who was the individual that provided what instruction, and is that tied back to a national identity?
Yeah, and like, again, yeah, exactly. We have the data sources. They need to be scaled out. They need to be because keep in mind that this also comes with volume, right? The volume of checks, the volume of everything is going to be increasing. But the key to this is making sure that you're using different data sources, and I mean disparate data sources that are unrelated to each other, because it's like asking somebody's opinion on a friend of yours, and if five of the other friends say, he's a good guy, he probably is a good guy, right? But so if you can use unrelated data sources to verify that transaction, even though how it came into the site, that's a different matter. But the actual data that you're getting on behalf of the customer is still there and it's still verifiable. So that's still valid, and you just have to make sure the infrastructure is there, that you can use those different sources extremely fast, extremely efficient. So that there's no drop-off or friction for the customer, well, where they'll go somewhere else.
Any thoughts, Trisham?
Yep, I agree fully. I think it's about going away from the static identification, like using more like behavioral data to kind of identify who is, driving your agent. I think it's definitely not reinventing the wheel. I think it's just like reusing or restructuring the use of the data. And I think you move away from just a static model where you like look at specific data set and you look at multiple data set to do your identification. So I think we're going to move. I saw the announcement from one of the biggest network on agentic commerce, and I was very excited about it too. But also, I asked the same questions, like how are they going to do all the checks? But I think they are working on it also. So yeah.
But I think your point on trying to learn what the new normal looks like, because if it's no longer human behavior, then what should we accept as a fraud signal and what should be a contraindicator? And I think we have some great examples of that if you look back through sort of early automated trading systems and looking at how you had sort of a combative nature between different algorithms. You started to need to learn how to mimic a human element, almost bring in some of that randomization element. But if you're doing that then becomes a bot versus bot arms race. So I still go back to who was the human that gave that instruction? Let's go consult them.
Yeah. I think that's why the sweet spot, I think, is still to keep the human in the loop at the moment, because we don't know. Like we tend to speculate a bit on how agents going to work and how AI is going to behave. So I think for me that's why I think to keep the human in the loop is safe at the moment.
And that's why we have, we have technology like this today that'll capable, so adaptive models. Adaptive models are designed exactly for that purpose, right? They're to adapt what's now, so okay, as I said, that script is bad and now it's not bad. Okay, that's fine, but that's just retraining the model and and then picking out those new features that do indicate the separation between the good and bad, and that doesn't take long.
Yeah.
Well, if you're using the right systems, that doesn't take long.
Absolutely, and I suppose there have been technologies out there. Oh, we have a question. We'll come for a question.
Thank you.
I think the microphone might need
Hello.
Oh, we've got you. We can hear you. Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on digital ID? And there's a lot of talk at the moment about the brick card. I know a lot in the emerging markets. This is already rolled out, and personally, I think it works well. But I think in the UK, there's a lot of resistance around it, but what are your thoughts on it?
I'll jump in if I can. I think digital ID is a huge power for good. If understood, if correctly implemented, then it really can solve a lot of problems. I'm not going to comment on what the government has announced and whether I think those particular problems can be solved with digital ID, but I think it's important to differentiate between a digital ID is not an ID card. A digital ID is really giving you as the citizen, the end user, the data subject, more control than you've ever had before. And so by being able to have people issue either receipts or evidences or documents like passports, mobile driving license, or a BRIT card, and to have you then in control of it, and as long as the actual infrastructure is designed so as to not impinge or infringe on your privacy, then it means you are now in control of your own personal information. You are now the curator and presenter of those tokens of trust that people have given to you. So there's a reason that I work in the industry and I'm so passionate about identity. I genuinely think it can solve a lot of problems. Won't solve everything though.
And another question over here, please, Izzy.
Hi. Talking about vendor reliance across IDV, KYC, AML, for example. Why are we still looking for the regulator to find organisations out where there are gaps in processes if financial institutions are pretty keen to ensure what their own houses? I find it remarkable in this day and age where the FCA can highlight 4 times the number of people in this room for certain banks turn out to be false accounts and fake accounts, and they've managed to go through current processes.
Who would like to take this one?
Yeah, sure. As an ex-compliance officer and also having worked with a lot of regulators, I think the reality is that the technology in the past few months, I would say, has evolved a lot. And at this stage where we're now, like if you ask me the question, maybe like in 6 months' time, I would say there's no big excuse. But I think for a number of years, there has been a very relaxed approach to the way KYC is being done. And a relaxed approach comes from the fact that you need like a big operation manpower to execute on this, because when you look at financial crime operations, they cost a lot of money. I'm not going to say the numbers, but it differs from financial institutions to financial institutions. And when you look at the way that the CEO look at it, they want to get it done, get the customer on, and get the work done very fast. And if you look at some of the companies, the way they kind of like, plan for it, they are okay to get those fines, strangely enough. And if you look at their financial accounting statement, they put a number line like, we're going to get X number of customer, make X amount of money, accept X amount of fraud, and we're going to get a fine. Mm-hmm. So I think that has been for a long time, that has been the approach. But now I think with new technology coming in, like I've worked on an agent which looked at a sanction investigation which will take like 3 days and now can be done in 10 minutes. So I think things have evolved very fast, and I think now organizations have got the tools, have got the mechanisms to kind of do better. And I hope in the next year or so we'll see less of those. But I think it has just been a cost discussion on how you execute on those.
I think there's also a reality that, and this has for decades has been like this, is major banks, and major financial institutions they weren't leaders in technology. They were followers, very much followers, and they were on average 10 years behind any of the so if you look at now like the new payday lenders, the neobanks like Revolut and stuff, their technology is, they've raced ahead, and the banks are playing catch up on that. And I think they're doing better on tech now, but only because they're developing features, not just VI, that are seamless, and it's costing them on their bottom line. So hopefully that changes, they catch up, they move faster as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you there, Diarmuid. Moving on then, because I know another key topic really when it comes to fraud and ID verification is balancing it with customer experience and making everything frictionless for customers. Obviously, while having those checks in place. For you, Trisham, what are some of the key trade-offs?
Yeah, I used to work for a large e-commerce company, and the word friction was banned. It was one click. You had to do everything in one click. And I spent 2 years of my life trying to make sure that this remained in the payments regulations. But I think that's what most organizations, especially e-commerce and digital business, aspire to, like the one-click operation. And I think, in a way, if there is a lot of friction, businesses will lose. Whenever I get something stop me on my e-commerce journey, I just I don't want to do it anymore. And they have to balance out. You have to balance out the friction and the experience. So I think, long story short, I think there will be different experiences. Like e-commerce, a big organization will have the tools in the background to kind of monitor the type of fraud that is happening, and I think large e-commerce, large businesses have the tools to kind of monitor behavioral behaviors on their store, if I can call it like that, or in their environment. But there will be different experiences. So, for example, in the post office, there will be probably like different experience for different people. So I think what I'm trying to say is that you need to kind of balance out the risk you're trying to kind of address and the type of population you're kind of working with. If you're more digital, you will probably be addressing a tech-savvy digital population, and there will be probably be other kind of population that you need a bit more friction. So I think recently the government has introduced a bit more frictions for people who are elderly in terms of the way they manage their accounts, and I think that's right. So it's all a balancing act, but I think for generally, the industry wants less friction.
Yes, absolutely. Perhaps Jason can enlighten us as to how the post office approaches the issues and the trade-off.
I certainly won't comment for post office, but I will. Okay. That's a different kettle of fish. But I will say I think there is friction. There is friction for the sake of theatrics, and I don't think you should underestimate that. I think that friction being placed, or at least breaks within a user experience onboarding or even an actual processing, friction can be a good thing. It gives any kind of sophisticated, automated, rapid attack a little bit of a break, a little bit of a buffer, a chance for your systems and all those shared signals, which are not instantaneous, to catch up. So I think for the 97%, whatever the figure you were using before, the 97% of us that just want to interact, just want to do our digital banking, just want to purchase things online, friction's terrible. I just want to buy it, get out of my way, please. But as a mitigant to the 3% of fraudsters, or 3% of activity that is fraudulent, having a little bit of friction in there can actually be quite reassuring. Having something send a negative signal and go, hang on, wait a sec, I'm just going to ask you for a step-up authentication for your benefit. Because if I don't do that, and I let this one through, then you may be the next victim.
Any thoughts at the end there, Diarmuid?
Well, yeah, I think we touched on this at the start as well, right? Is that, like, friction is good. I agree, like, there's always going to be some degree, but, you know, it's hopefully, for the most part, seamless, but it's still there. When I switched about 15 years ago, I switched from being the user of different fraud systems to being the designer and builder, and so that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. And in that time, I've been saying, like, well, largely the problem with fraud is you can't see the forest through the trees, right? Because, as I said, 97% are good, but you can't see, you know, you're trying to. So what if you use the fraud systems and the data to remove the good? What if you could get the good out of the way? And even to maybe 90% of them, and you're still left with a certain, but now you've got, and that's the element here. So you can use the same systems to reduce the friction, you know, and you're not like you were describing, we used to be called the anti-sales department, like, you know, in fraud, like, and so, like, you know, you can say, no, I can get you more sales, I can increase your conversion rates, I can increase the speeds that people do. I'm just going to focus on this demographic. So you can use the same data for both, you know, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Absolutely. Any more questions from the audience? I see a few hands over here. I think this gentleman here, is he?
Hi, Robin Toombs from Yoti. Two small questions. One, how big an issue do you think deepfakes will become in the fraud in the sector? And secondly, are you confident for what reasons fraud will either be bigger or smaller in 5 years' time in the UK market?
Yeah, I can start. I think fraud is going to increase because it's just kind of a natural way of, not a natural, but unfortunate natural way of when you kind of introduce new technology, then there will be kind of balancing acts. So definitely, I think, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think there was the EBA kind of did some prediction around, you know, how fraud will increase with the rise of deepfake. But I think the way that the technologies is also very evolving very fast in the sense of the technology to detect deepfake and the mechanism. So I think what is important is not just look at the technology, but look at the whole mechanism on how you're kind of detecting deepfakes and identity verification. So again, I was saying before, it used to be like a static, let's look at one document, but you need to probably like start looking at different data points, and that becomes kind of the identity of, you know, doing identification. So I think there will be, unfortunately, there will be an increase and there will be more regulations coming. I think from what I've observed, at least from the UK side, it's a very much outcome-based regulations where, you know, firms will be given targets to meet to kind of mitigate those risks of fraud. And I think very importantly, I think it's just educating people a bit more on how, you know, like to protect their identity, and I think that needs to be done a bit more.
I think Gen AI is the latest and greatest tool, and fraudsters are still getting up to speed with just how powerful it is. I think as we've seen sort of the rapid growth and sophistication of Gen AI and LLMs, I think we need to assume that rate of improvement is going to continue, and so we need to be thinking a couple of steps ahead before this is very much weaponized against us and all current defenses are irrelevant. I think at the end of the day, and this is going to be a plug for Post Office, at the end of the day, there is nothing better than sending somebody in for a physical interaction. It's really hard for a bot to do that. And so that's really one of the things that Post Office has worked to make sure that there are a solution in place that can leverage all of the identity verification technology, all of it that's available, with mandating that the person actually is physically in the physical presence is there. It's hard to spoof that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, like that we've touched on is looking at the identity differently, like that those those deep fakes and stuff like that. They're still quite fixed as an identity, right, as a structure. But the identity is not a fixed structure. It's an evolving, it's a growing, it's a changing. So you look at it as almost like a living, like your different addresses that you, different IPs that you use, different devices. And when you look at an identity that way, it's very hard for the deepfakes. Now, I would say the vast majority of companies out there don't look at identity like that at the moment, but we can start to look at it like that. And then it gets very tricky. It may eventually evolve, of course, but it gets very tricky.
I saw some more hands over this way. Izzy, we'll go to the gentleman there.
Thanks. So you were saying, I think everyone agrees that we want to do more in this space and we should be doing more in this space, but you also acknowledge that top of the organisation might not be willing to pay to do more, doesn't see the benefit in doing so if it's just a cost of doing business. You then reference that you've got the newer fintechs coming through who in theory should have better technology and better data, and yet when you look at as APP specific, you look at the PSR data, the fintechs are the worst performing per million than the larger players. So with that in mind then, how can we go back and persuade and influence seniors that it is right to invest in this space? If regulatory censor isn't a deterrent, cost of doing business isn't a deterrent, even if the victim gets fined, the victim suffers fraud, that probably isn't a deterrent either. It's the customer experience they experience after that that's going to dictate if they leave the firm or not. So what can be done to encourage better spending and better investment in this space?
Yeah, just on the fintech side, in terms of the neobanks, you have to keep in mind they're also being far more aggressive and maybe overstepping what their capabilities are. So their customer acquisition policies, their appetite for risk and so on are far more aggressive than any of the traditional banks. They're taking on more of the kind of subprime and stuff. Basically, the type of client demographic that the main banks wouldn't go near. So, do they have higher rates? Yeah, they probably do, but they're far more higher. The profit margins as well associated with it. Well, relatively speaking, within that are greater. So they're partly that they're just more willing to accept that new tech and quickly adopt it and quickly integrate it. And I think the integration speed is key. That the likes of the bigger structures, it takes them so long. I mean, we have these conversations, I'm not joking, they'll last years before they even think about actually looking at the integration. So that time does cost money in fraud.
I was just going to say, I think my view is that money talks and customers will vote with their feet. And so I think there is greater benefit in encouraging people to understand where data breaches are coming from, who is responsible for them, because then that should float to the top of the priority list, because then it's less about what do we do after the horse has bolted, after the data breaches happen, how do we manage this on a case-by-case basis. It's the reputation of your organization and of the brand that you're building and of the benefit that you're trying to bring to your stakeholders or shareholders. That's at stake. And so if you're struggling to get the prioritization to implement advanced fraud controls or to take this seriously, then I would look at just how bad things can get.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the trust that, if organizations do not invest in the right technologies, and, we've seen lots of fintechs being fined recently, if they lose the trust and they would lose the market share. But having said that, I think I work with a wide range of large banks to fintechs. And interesting enough, it's the large banks with legacy platform who are investing a lot in their center of excellence for AI and getting their data right, getting it right, because I think they've learned that if they are going to get fined, they will lose that trust and the fintech will come and take over, their market share. But I've seen lots of the large banks are investing in their Center of Excellence for AI. They're looking at their data strategy because you can't get AI right if you don't have the right data strategy. And their biggest priority is actually on financial crime and fraud prevention and consumer protection. See, these are the big topics they're working on. It's because they've been fined before and they've learned. So I think a lot of the large organizations are on the right track, I think. And I think the fintech will now move faster because the technology is there. And I think it's just not about technology, sometimes it's about the policy, it's about the way that you do things. And because the technology could be the right one, it could be there. But if your policies say, oh, I'm not gonna look at these data points on the onboarding process, let it go through, then whatever technology you put in place doesn't matter. So I think there's a lot of balancing act at the moment happening in the industry.
I think there may have been one more hand up.
Hi, Stephen Walsh from Keeper Solutions here. Our identity is very much tied to our mobile phones, and I see the industry is giving us more capability 24/7, more apps that you can send money. But then, people, their phones are being stolen more. And I heard a fellow on the radio the other morning, he lost 40 grand. So I just wonder, is there a bit of a dichotomy between where the industry is going and how safe individuals are? I mean, if everyone looked at your own phone today and it was stolen while unlocked, how many grand would you lose? So that's just something I thought I'd put to you to talk about.
Such a complex problem, and one that, if you're walking around the streets of London, you should take this seriously. I don't think there's a single solution to it. I think we've seen some advancements from the device manufacturers in terms of the actual automatic locking and remote wiping controls. That's fantastic. But the fraudsters just work around that. They're now faster, they're more sophisticated. In terms of the role that the phone has in sort of being the heart of your digital life, I think there needs to be a trade-off there. And from an identity perspective, this is really the tension between a managed service and a fully self-sovereign one. Everybody loves the idea, identity nerds love the idea of fully self-sovereign identity, right up until you tell people that they're responsible for it, and then they can lose it. And then all of a sudden compromises need to be taken, compromises will be made. And so I think there is a role for data privacy and user control, but also a little bit of assistance, because we're all just human.
Anything else to add, you two?
Yeah, I will agree. I think this goes down to that collaboration question that came through. I think this is where the different technologies involved around the identity have a role to play, and I think this is where I agree with you. It's a very complex issue. If you break it down, there's kind of various dependencies, and you're like, where do I go? Where do I start? I think the phone companies, the telecommunication companies, do also have a responsibility on this journey. It needs to be recognized by, I'm going to be bold here, by policymakers, and come up with outcome-based solutions on how these can help in the fight against crime, basically.
I think, well, you said it actually. I think the technology has advanced so fast that maybe the friction side of it for the phone, because we want it easy, we want to be able just to tap and go, and we want that, we like that part, but we don't like it when it goes wrong. So I think in that case, like, it's more so on the device technology and also the app that's allowing that transaction to occur, right? What are the verification steps within that app? So like, you can't, even though somebody's taken your phone, they haven't got your face or whatever, so your authentication, two-factor authentication comes a big part of that, of course, on your phone, because you need a second authentication app. So be curious to know how they got 40 grand out, but in that one example, but yeah, I think there's still a lot of that, but it's about the speed, and the speed, if you think about where we were 5 years ago, the speed of this development has been rapid.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you, audience. We will have to move on now, unfortunately, because we are fast running out of time, and one thing I did want to touch on, Trisham, that you mentioned earlier was about compliance and the global regulations that are out there around data privacy, data identity. How can organizations adapt to stay both compliant and secure?
Yeah, I think it's going to sound a bit cliche, but I think it has to be compliance by design. So I think what most organizations, and I'm seeing quite interesting, a lot of CEOs are now lawyers and compliance officers, which is very interesting, which means that organizations should be kind of designing their products and their operations around how they meet regulations. Now, that the regulator needs to balance out as to what outcome they want to kind of give to organizations. So I think in the UK we've seen, and I know there's some ex-regulators in the room, like it's been very outcome-based regulations, which is always very good. So you give organization targets on how you're going to meet your fraud levels, for example, and then the organization is left to kind of design the solutions, the technology, versus a bit more prescriptive, which tends to be happening in Europe, where you have to do things in a certain way. So I feel that I think generally, like, regulators and the industry needs to be working very much together, looking at the outcomes and also looking at the mechanism, technology to kind of drive those outcomes.
Anything to add, Jason?
Just to say that I think when you need to write it down and call it compliance, it's already lost a little bit of its meaning. I would really encourage people to go back to sort of the grassroots of why are you doing this, because at the end of the day, you're trying to protect your customers, their money, their trust in your business, in your company, and the relationship that they have with them. So just focus on keeping that safe, and everything else should just fall into line.
Yeah, like most businesses, most banks, everything I've worked for, it's like a tick box. What's the bare minimum I can be as a business to be compliant? And it's not about that. Like, it shouldn't be about that. It should be how much more can I do, and use that data for other reasons. Absolutely, use it for different, customer insight information, fraud prevention, whatever. But it shouldn't be looked at as a goal, a threshold that you can barely meet, and that's the cheapest way we can do it, because ultimately it probably costs you in the long run.
Absolutely. I think we have around about a minute left, so if there are any additional questions from the audience, now will be the time to get it in. One at the front here.
Hello. Yeah. So we have spoke a lot about digital better ID verification within each company, but I'm curious to understand, do you think that the next frontier will be data collaboration across organizations, or we are still too constrained with privacy frameworks that prevent that from happening?
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, but I see the way forward is with putting the user at the heart of it. The user you should be able to articulate to the end user what the benefit is in sharing more data with more organizations and allowing different organizations to talk to each other. And this is playing out as a microcosm in the UK government. They're trying to figure out how they can break down the barriers between their own data sets and silos. When we from the outside just look at government of course, it's organized, it's all one. No, it's not. It's all little tiny fragments. So when we look out into the private sector, we need to make that same case to the individual. We could do a better job if you would let information flow, if you want to sort of opt into this. And some people will see the benefit and they'll go for it, and others will say no thank you. And I think that's fine.
Yeah, I agree fully. I think it's the choice of the individuals, because you own your data. And I think the privacy laws, I think they need to be here because they are here for a reason, and they protect us. But I think it's about organization explaining to their clients like how their data is going to be used, and do they want to put that data out there, and that create that community of data which can be used for good. So I don't think privacy should stop this. I think actually it provides the guardrails to to kind of do this. So I disagree with you in the sense that privacy is stopping this. I think it's actually the guardrail to allow this. Yeah.
And the next big things will be the personal data economy. It will be exactly as we've described.
Yeah.
It will be the user in control of more and more information, and organizations being able to access more and more information than ever before, and without the risk of data breach and all the negativity that comes with it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much to our audience for the questions. We're just about out of time. And thank you again to Diarmuid, Jason and Trisham for your time today. I think a round of applause is in order for you three. Thank you very much.